All right, we made it. This is our last chapter, chapter 17, that we're going to go over for this class, which is called The Evolution of Animals. So we're going to start with our most basic type of animal, and you'll be able to see the evolutionary pattern as we go from our most simple type of animal to our most complex types of animals. And then what we'll do is we're going to watch a video specifically on human evolution for our last video for your time here for Bio 1010. All right, let's get to it. So there are 9 major groups of animals, and so we're going to look at each one of these groups. We have sponges, cnidarians, mollusks, flatworms, annelids, roundworms, arthropods, echinoderms, and chordates. Now you can see what we have is we've made a clade here, just kind of like we did last time when we made that clade for mammals. So this is clade for animals. So our ancestral protist here is the common ancestor for all of these different animals. And so we're going to see how our oldest form of animals is our sponges, and then we're going to work all the way down to our chordates. And then when we get to our chordates, we're going to open that up and see a little bit more on our chordates. All right, so let's start with our sponges. So that's our first one here. All right, these are our simplest form of animals. So if you think of SpongeBob, SpongeBob is a sponge. And you may not think of it as an animal, but it is because it has the simple things that are required to be an animal. And that main thing is that they consume their food. And you see here, sponges, they have these holes in them. That's why they're spongy, right? And what happens is water flows through these holes, and inside the middle of these sponges, there's these little amoebocytes, and these amoebocytes have these kind of tail things hanging out that actually absorb any of the plankton and the small types of nutrients that are found inside the water, and that's actually how they feed. And so the water flows in through those holes, and the nutrients get stuck into these amoebocytes where it feeds, and then that water flows out, and that's actually how they consume their food. So that's our sponges. So we have sponges. Our next is going to be our cnidarians, and these are identified by their tentacles. So you think of things like jellyfish are our cnidarians. So we have 3 main types of cnidarians. We have our corals. So once again, you probably wouldn't think corals are actually animals, but they are. We have our sea anemones. So think of Finding Nemo and how the clownfish live in the sea anemones. Those are also animals. And then lastly, we have what we call our jellies. So our jellies, we call them jellies and not jellyfish. And the reason for that is they're not actually fish. And so really, if you're referring to them, you should refer to them as jellies, not jellyfish, even though commonly we use the term jellyfish all the time. But you can correct your family member, your friend, next time they say jellyfish, be like, no, they're actually jellies because they're not fish. And they all have these kind of tentacle things that allows them to feed. For our corals, it's kind of interesting. What you're actually seeing here on our corals is the carbon calcium kind of skeletal structure that they build. So actually living inside these calcium structures is where the actual corals are. All right, so we have our sponges, we have our cnidarians. Our next is going to be our mollusks, and we have 3 different types of mollusks. We have our gastropods, our bivalves, and our cephalopods. So we're going to look at each one of these groups. So first are our gastropods. So these are your slugs and your snails. And you see here we have a couple of different options. So we have snails here, and then we have these this regular slug and a sea slug. Kind of looks all pretty. So all of these are gastropods. And if you can see here, it might be a little hard to see, but this is when I was living in South Africa, and this is a giant snail. So you can see this is my hand here. So when we came back from, I think we were out hanging out in my wife's family's house, when we came back to the place we were staying at, there was this huge snail on the door. And so I wanted to get a good depiction of how big it was, but I put my hand up there. So you can see with my hand, so there's my thumb and my finger, you can see that this snail, it was huge. It was a big snail. All right, so that's our gastropods. Next are our bivalves. So our bivalves are all these nice, tasty things we like to eat. So there are oysters, our clams, our mussels, our scallops. These are all really good things, and they're called bivalves because they have these shells around them. There's 2 of them, and kind of give a nice look at how a bivalve looks like on the inside. So they also filter feed, which means they feed off the plankton and the things that are inside the water. And they do that kind of with the water coming in and out right here. And so they actually have a mouth and they have an anus on this other end. And so as the food comes in, it goes through and then it's excreted out. Their waste is excreted out through the same way that their food comes in as well. All right, so these are all found inside of the bivalve. And it's interesting, they have this big thing here called a foot. And this foot is actually beneficial for them if they want to move or if they want to hold tight to a certain area. So they'll use this foot, it'll come out of their shell and it will hold tight to something. Or they can kind of use it to move as well if they're out of water. So there's a kind of a cool video that shows this clam, and what it's going to do, it has all this salt around it, and because it's been taken outside of the ocean, you can see it's now using its foot to lick up the salt that is on this table. So it looks like it's actually licking it up, but it's not a tongue, but it's actually its foot. And it uses that foot to be able to move around. But in this sense, because it's been out of the ocean and it's used to a salty environment, it's trying to get more salt added back in to inside of it. So that's why you see this foot coming out. It's pretty cool, pretty interesting video here. All right, so our next group are our cephalopods. So cephalopods, the idea here means head, feet. So pods are feet and cephalo is head. So these guys kind of have a head and feet. So you have your octopus, you have your squid, and you have your nautilus. And they're all kind of interesting. One of the great cool things about like your squids and your octopus and your nautilus is they have these chromatophores on them that allow them to change color and be able to blend into environments as well. I've got another cool video that shows this.
An octopus or a cephalopod, you need to really understand how to use your surroundings to hide. In the next scene, you're going to see a nice coral bottom, and you see that an octopus would stand out very easily there if you couldn't use your camouflage, use your skin to change color and texture. Here's some algae in the foreground, and an octopus. Isn't that amazing? Now Roger spooked him, so as he took off, a cloud of ink, lands, and when he lands, the octopus says, "Look, I've been seen, best thing to do is get as big as I can get." That big brown makes his eye spot very big. So he's bluffing. Let's do it backwards. I thought he was joking when he first showed it to me. I thought it was all graphics. So here it is in reverse. Watch the skin color, watch the skin texture. Just an amazing animal. Can change color and texture to match the surroundings. Watch him blend right into this algae. 1, 2, 3. And now he's gone, and so am I. Thank you very much.
All right, so that's really cool to see how that octopus actually changed its skin color and texture to be able to blend in nicely with that shrub there at the bottom of the ocean. All right, so next we have our sponges, our cnidarians, mollusks. Next we have our flatworms. All right, so our flatworms contain our planaria and our tapeworms. And so this is an actual tapeworm. This is a head of a tapeworm. And what a tapeworm does, if it's in your intestines, it has this head with these kind of 4 mouth holes that it holds on into your intestine. And then it will start to grow. And this is a huge long tapeworm that was taken out of somebody. I think this one ended up being about 3 or 4 feet long. And what it does, it just continues to grow and grow and grow. And then each one of these sections of its body contains eggs, and so it continues to release eggs into your intestines, and then as you excrete them out when you go to the bathroom, then if you don't wash your hands and you touch something and someone else touches something, then they touch their mouth or they eat their food, then that's how they get infected with a tapeworm as well. And these are planaria. Planaria are a very simple type of living organisms. They have very small genetics, and we use them a lot of the times in genetic studies because of how simple they are and because they're like translucent. So when you change things in them genetically, you can actually see those changes as well. The other kind of cool thing about planaria is that you can cut them in half and they regenerate and they'll grow. So you can cut them in half here and they'll grow two more. You can cut them down the middle and they'll grow. They're kind of interesting in that sense. And they have these kind of rudimentary eye spots as well that allows them to detect light and dark. All right, and then we also have, within our flatworms, we have these flukes. So these flukes actually live inside, that's kind of a two-host system, kind of like we saw with the malaria where you had to have the Plasmodium vivax live inside the human and the mosquito to be able to survive. Well, these flukes are very similar, where they have to live inside these snail shells and in humans to be able to live. So it's a two-life cycle. And these flukes, what they'll do is when you're in the water, they'll bury into your leg and then go into your intestines where they release out their eggs. And then when you go to the bathroom and you excrete out those eggs, usually that's in water, and then they'll hatch into these little bugs that go in and infect the snails, and then the snails, they'll grow into these adults that will then penetrate and complete that life cycle of a fluke. And it's very interesting. We have a unique fluke here in southern Utah out at Sand Hollow. You probably have heard of Sand Hollow swimmer itch. This is from a fluke called Schistosoma dermatitis. And the interesting thing about it, so there's these snails in there that they live, and we're actually not the second host for this fluke. So in our previous picture, this fluke that's found in Asia, we are the second host, humans are. But in this fluke that's found inside Sand Hollow, it's actually waterfowl, so birds that are the second hosts. So you're wondering, okay, then why am I getting swimmer's itch? So what ends up happening is they think that we are waterfowl and they bury into our skin, but we're not the host, and so they actually die and get stuck into our skin, and we get an allergic reaction from it, and that's where you get that swimmer's itch because of that. So something you can tell your friends when you go out to Sand Hollow, guess what? That's actually a swimmer's itch that you get because they think that they're trying to infect us, but really they should be infecting the waterfowl. All right, so we have our sponges, our cnidarians, our mollusks, our flatworms, and now we have our annelids. So our annelids are kind of like traditional worms, earthworms, leeches, and that we see. So it's kind of interesting. So on our earthworm, you probably always see this patch right here. That patch is actually where their reproductive system areas are. And then leeches, as you know, they're blood sucking, so they feed off of blood. So they have in their saliva an anticoagulant, because usually if you cut yourself, you'll bleed for a while, but then it will start to coagulate up and kind of go into a scab. Well, these leeches, when they bite you, they have this anticoagulant, which just allows your blood to keep flowing, and that's why they'll get big and big. So if you put a leech on you, they'll like get 3 to 4 times their body size by sucking all of that blood. All right, once again, sponges, cnidarians, mollusks, flatworms, annelids, and now we have our roundworms, or sometimes also known as nematodes. All right, so roundworms, we have some different types. We have pinworms, hookworms, nematodes, heartworms, and these ones also tend to infect our intestines. This is actually an intestine of a dog that's been infected by a pinworm. And as you can see, all these different pinworms that were found in the intestine of that dog. So it's really bad. You can get infected with like heartworms and hookworms if you eat like pork or meat that isn't cooked correctly and the eggs are found inside those pork or meat, and then you can get infected. and have those worms actually live inside your intestine. So they're not really good. If you go to like countries sometimes where maybe they aren't the best at cooking their food, like if you go to undeveloped countries, you can get really sick from that. And sometimes they'll actually have you take like anti-worm type of drugs, so that if you did get some worm eggs inside you, you can get that flushed out by killing those. All right, so sponges, cnidarians, mollusks, flatworms, annelids, roundworms. Now we're looking at our arthropods. So we have 4 different types of arthropods. We have our arachnids, our crustaceans, our millipedes and centipedes, and our insects. So let's first look at our arachnids. So arachnids are, we can determine arachnid by how many legs it has. So arachnids have 8 legs. So if you're looking at a bug and you don't know if it's an insect or an arachnid, count the legs, and if it has 8 legs, then it's arachnid. So those include spiders, scorpions, and ticks. Once again, have 8 legs. Next is our arthropods. So these are, our arthropods is the crustaceans. So those include things like crabs, lobsters, shrimp, crayfish. So you can kind of see all of these here. And then we have our millipedes and centipedes. So this here is centipede and this here is millipede. So the reason why they get their name, pede means feet. And so millipede stands for million, so million of feet. So this is our millipede. You can see it has a lot of feet. So it's like saying it has a million feet. Doesn't really, but it's kind of way you describe it. Then we have centipede. Centi means 100. So it's saying like it has hundreds of feet. So not as many as a millipede. That's how you can tell the difference. Another interesting thing you can see with our millipedes and centipedes that they have all these different sections. And a centipede will only have 1 leg per section, where a millipede, for each one of its sections, it ends up having 2 legs. All right, and then our last arthropod is our insects. So that could be like our bees, our flies, our butterflies, our moths, our ladybird beetles or ladybugs, ants, grasshoppers, praying mantis, whole bunch of different types of insects out there. And if you're looking at a bug and trying to figure out if it's an insect, the one way you look at it is how many legs it has. Insects have 6 legs. So arachnids had 8 legs, insects have 6 legs, and those millipedes and centipedes have many, many legs, right? Another interesting thing when you're looking at the difference between like a butterfly and a moth, if you see one and you're wondering which one's a butterfly, which one's a moth, so most of the time you would say, okay, well, moths usually look dark and not as colorful, and butterflies are. Yeah, that's true mostly, but there are some really beautiful, colorful moths, and there are also some really dull-looking butterflies. So really, to determine which one's a moth and a butterfly, it's how they land. So when a butterfly lands, it lands with its wings up. When a moth lands, it lands with its wings out. That's how you can also tell if you're looking at a moth or a butterfly, if they tend to be, beautiful or dull on the opposite spectrum there. All right, go through this again. Sponges, cnidarians, mollusks, flatworms, annelids, roundworms, arthropods. Now we're going to look at our echinoderms. So our echinoderms are going to be our sea urchins, our sand dollars. Probably didn't know that sand dollars were living organisms, but they are. They're animals. And even our sea stars. Once again, not starfish, because starfish aren't fish, so we call them sea stars. And then we also have our sea cucumbers as well. So if you ever get a chance to come to the science building, that's where I'm recording this now, we actually have a really cool sea cucumber. His name is Jerry the sea cucumber. We have like little plushy animals of him. He's kind of our unofficial mascot for the biology department, because we have this nice saltwater aquarium, and you can come see our sea cucumber, Jerry the sea cucumber. And you see sea stars here, they actually have a mouth on the opposite end, and that's actually their mouth and their anus. So they eat the food and they excrete their food through that same hole. And that's similar with our sea urchins and our sea dollars as well. They also have one mouth, one anus. There's one hole that counts for both. All right, once again, sponges, cnidarians, mollusks, flatworms, annelids, roundworms, arthropods, echinoderms, And lastly, we're going to look now at our chordates. So our chordates are those animals that start to have what we call a backbone. So now we have 9 main groups of chordates. We have our tunicates, our lancets, our hagfish, our lampreys, our cartilaginous fish, our bony fish, amphibians, reptiles, and lastly mammals. So now we're going to look at each one of these groups. So let's start with our tunicates. So our tunicates are these kind of cool looking neon colored, almost like jugs. And what they do is they have one opening here at the top where water comes in, and then they filter feed, and then their digestive system goes this way, and then it exits out this other side. So these now are starting to have a separate mouth and anus hole, so it's this one continual movement from one end to another end. So it comes in and out, in one hole, out another. Next is our lancets. And so these are also filter feeders. They're kind of interesting. So a lancet, a lance is like a sword, and that's why they call them, because they look like these little swords. And what they do is they stick themselves butt first into the sand, and so their mouth is out here, and they filter feed with the different nutrients and plankton and all that kind of stuff that goes here, and then they are able to excrete that down here into the sand. And now this guy, what he did is he actually reached into the sand and pulled up, and you can see all these different lancets. So they're small little things, they're not very big, and they're kind of interesting how they just dig themselves into the sand there and just wait for food to swing by and get it. Next is our hagfish. So these guys aren't very big, but they kind of look like an eel, but they're a little bit more rudimentary, a little bit more archaic than an eel, and they have these interesting faces. And what they do is they'll hold on to stuff, and they'll use that to feed off of. But very interesting about hagfish is that they secrete this very potent slime when you try to grab them. It's a great defense against enemies. We got a cool video on that. All right, that's kind of gross, right? All that muck that he was able to get off of it. Can you imagine if you were some type of predator and you're wanting to eat that animal, all of a sudden you got this mouthful of mucus. Really gross. Kind of cool though to see as well. Next we have our lampreys. So our lampreys are kind of like the vampires of the ocean. As you can see here, they have this circular head with all these sharp teeth. And what they'll do is they'll attach onto its prey in a sense, or a fish, and be able to suck the blood from it. So it's kind of a cool looking type of a thing here. Next we have our cartilaginous fish. Our cartilaginous fish are fish that are made up of cartilage. So their main bone structure is cartilage. So when you think of cartilage, think of like your nose or your ear, if you feel those, and how flexible they are. So they're a very flexible skeleton because of that cartilage. But also cartilage doesn't fossilize well. It breaks and decays pretty quick. So if you ever think of like a skeleton, you see like a human skeleton, you never see nose bone or ear bones on them. And that's because they break down really easy. And that's why it's really hard for us to find different types of fossils of sharks and rays, because they're mainly made out of cartilage. And because of that, the only thing that really fossilizes is their teeth that does have that calcium bone structure to it. And so you think of things like megalodon. If you've ever seen a fossil megalodon, all it is the big teeth, the mouth. And we assume from that, okay, it must look like the rest of a shark because it's very similar to the mouth of like a great white. So here we have our different cartilaginous fish. So we have our sharks, so we have like our hammerhead, our makos, our great whites, and then we have our rays, which also includes those big manta rays that you've probably seen as well. Our next type of fish are our bony fish, and we have two types of bony fish. We have our ray finned, so you can see our ray fin. The bones inside their fins kind of spread out like a ray of sun, so they spread out. And then we have our lobe fin. Our lobe fin kind of have like more of a secure bone structure inside of them. So the majority of our fish inside the ocean and in the in lakes and streams and all that kind of stuff are our ray fin. You'll see like this, and there's very few that are the lobe fin, and that's the one main reason for that is that they ended up evolving into our land animals. In fact, they thought this one here had been extinct for many years, but they actually found a few of them off the coast of Madagascar back in the mid 2000s. And so, like I said, because of this lobe fin, it's believed that they were able to eventually kind of slowly get out of the water, maybe to grab some type of food source. So trees or plants and stuff like that have started to grow on the edges of water at that point, and so they were able to go out there and maybe get food that no other animal was getting, and so they gave them an evolutionary advantage. And as they continue to go further and further out and build those limbs, and evolution worked on those that had stronger and stronger limbs, that's when you saw this evolution from being a lobe fin fish into our next group, which is our amphibians. So amphibians are animals that are still tied to water. That's why they're amphibians. Amphibious means land and water. And so our amphibians are still tied to water, and the main reason they're tied to water is because of their eggs. So their eggs, if you ever see like the eggs of a frog or toad or newt or salamander, they kind of look like these see-through gels. And what happens is, because that's all that they are, they need to not dry out, so they have to be laid in water. So all of our amphibians lay their eggs in water. And by laying them in water, they don't desiccate, they don't dry out, and that's the reason why all of our amphibians are still tied to water. Now you can see a lot of these live on land, but they also can live in water, but a lot of them do live on land, and most of them are in very wet areas. You do see some that are in dry areas, but you'll notice once again they're always living close by water, because once again their eggs have to be laid in water. So you ever see like toads and frogs, and they have those tadpoles that live in the water, right? And another interesting thing about our amphibians is actually they breathe through their skin. So they have this mucus that covers their whole body, and their underbelly is actually where they breathe in and out air, so they don't use it through their mouth. And that's also why a lot of our amphibians are they react very badly to toxins that are found in water, because they're in and out of the water, and that water actually helps them with that breathing of having oxygen come in and CO2 come out. And so if there's any toxins in that water, they immediately are absorbing those toxins as well, and it's very deadly for our amphibians. All right, so that was that next evolutionary step, right, to go on to land, so they're still tied to water. Well, our next group is our reptiles, and our reptiles took even that next evolutionary step, and that evolutionary step was to have an amniote. And an amniote is like this fluid sac that's found in the eggs of reptiles. And what that means is that now these reptiles can actually lay their eggs on land, because this amniote, this fluid sac, is inside the egg, and it provides all the water that's needed for that embryo as it starts to grow and to develop. And even though you still see some of our reptiles, so our reptiles here are lizards, our snakes, our turtles and our tortoises, and our crocodiles and alligators, even though like our crocodiles, alligators, and tortoises, not tortoises, but turtles still live in water, they all lay their eggs outside of water, right? So you always see those National Geographic where the turtles migrate all the way to this one beach, and they go on the beach, they dig a hole, and they lay all their eggs, and then they go back into the ocean, and then, you know, a few weeks later, those eggs hatch, and those little turtles now make their way back into the ocean. So even though they live in the ocean and live in water, they're actually tied to the land, because their eggs have to be laid on land. And so you see that with alligators and crocodiles. And then you see with a lot of these others, so our lizards and snakes and tortoises, they're not tied to water at all, right? They need water regular living, but that's just to drink. They don't have to live in water. And you'll actually see a lot of these things, especially our lizards and our snakes and even our tortoise, live in really, really dry areas. And they can do that because of that amnio fluid, that amnio sac that's found inside the eggs of our reptiles. So that's that, once again, that next evolutionary step that allowed these animals now to be fully out of water and not have to be in water, specifically with like these lizards and snakes here. Another interesting thing you might not know is that birds are reptiles. There are a specific group of reptiles called aves, and they are reptiles. And specifically, we kind of talked about this before, is that they are the ancestors of our dinosaurs as well. So a group of dinosaurs then evolved into birds. And so you could technically say birds are living dinosaurs today. We just call them aves instead of dinosaurs because they're a specific group that branched out and was able to live through the extinction process that killed the rest of their ancestral ancestors. So that's pretty cool. Our next now is our mammals. So now we're going to be taking that next evolutionary step. So we went from being partial water and land with our amphibians, then full land with our reptiles. Now with mammals, what we've done is we found ways to better protect our young by being able to feed them directly from us, and that's where you have these mammary glands that come about. So our very first type of mammals are our monotremes, and we've talked about these before, our platypus and our echidnas, and they're very similar to reptiles because they still lay eggs. But they're different because they have these mammary glands, which allows them to feed their young right when they're born, and so they get that immediate energy. And they also have hair, which is a different form of protecting them in the environment. And so our monotremes, there's only two species, well, there's three species, one species of platypus, and there's actually two different species of echidna. So you can see this is a very old version of mammals. So most of our mammals then went on to evolve into our next type, which is our marsupials. So our marsupials are once taking that next evolutionary step. So marsupials, what they do is they don't lay eggs at all, right? They actually have their young develop inside them. And why would that be important? Well, if your young is developing inside you, then it's harder for the predators to go out and eat your young. If you have eggs that are just laid out somewhere, you have to guard those eggs. Well, what happens when you have to go eat? Those predators come in, they try to steal those eggs. Well, guess what? Now you have your young growing inside you, so you're protecting your young from predators. And what you'll notice with most mammals is they don't have a lot of young, right? When you look at compared to like lizards and snakes and even amphibians, they lay a lot of eggs because they know that some of those eggs are going to be eaten by predators. So instead, because you're protecting your young inside you as you develop them, you only have to have one or two, and then even with some mammals, you can have like a litter of, I think rabbits are some of the largest that have like a litter of like 8 or 10, but still that's a lot less than when you see like a crocodile nest that has something like 40 to 50 eggs in it, or 30 to 40 eggs in it. So because you're protecting them inside your body, you don't have to have as many young. And with our marsupials, they have partial gestation, right? So they start to develop inside the uterus and then they leave to the pouch. The pouch also still protects them, but in the pouch is where the nipples are found, and that's where they can start to be able to feed on the milk that the mother provides for the young. And once again, so that's that next evolutionary. So after our marsupials, we then have our eutherians. So we get rid of the pouches and we go to full gestation, which means once the infant is fully developed, it is then birthed. So we birth fully developed infants instead of having them partially developed and then go into a pouch. Once again, another evolutionary benefit because it allows you to protect that infant until they are fully developed before they're going to be out in the world and have to deal with predators at that point. And so we have a bunch of different forms here of our eutherians. So these are most of the mammals you think about. So we have our whales, our elks, lions, wolves, cows, giraffes, bears, bats, mice, and our favorite mammal, humans, and my favorite mammal, Brad Pitt. And this is what we're going to be talking about next. So on our next video that you'll watch is going to be the evolution of humans, and seeing that whole process and seeing all the evidence showing of our evolution from ape-type creatures into the humans that we know today. And then after that, we'll have our last Zoom meeting where we'll talk about our final exam that we're going to have on Friday, and we'll be able to answer any questions for you at that point, and then we'll be done with the class. I know this has been a very non-traditional type of class with us having to do everything because of COVID-19. I would have much rather have you guys here in the classroom with me as we talk about all these different things and be able to engage you more and ask questions and hope you learn a little bit more. But I hope that you've been able to learn something new from this biology class and take away some very unique and interesting things.